What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, and on this episode, as always, to round out the show later on, we'll get to your thoughts, your comments from this final weekend in the regular season for the Premier Lacrosse League that wrapped up out in Albany. Segment 2 on the show a little bit later, we'll get to the final regular season power rankings for the Premier Lacrosse League as well. But to start out the show here on a Monday, I want to talk about the Waterdogs taking the #1 seed in the postseason and the Cannons backdooring their way into the playoffs here in about a week from now. So like I said, to start it out, the Waterdogs winning the game against the Atlas on Saturday for that #1 seed in the PLL postseason. The Atlas now sitting at #2. They'll take on the Cannons, as I mentioned, who kind of backdoored their way into the playoffs on Saturday night. But honestly, the Waterdogs, in my opinion, definitely deserved to win this game. I can't blame JD Colarusso and the Atlas defense for that loss whatsoever. I mean, you look at Colarusso in specific, he went 50% for the game, which is pretty on par for him even going into that game, and gave up just 10 scores against, which again, pretty on par performance for him going into that one. I think I tweeted out around halftime of that Waterdogs Atlas game that he was just above 50% in his past 3 starts combined and was giving up just about 10 or so scores per game. So again, like I said, very on par performance from JD Colarusso and that Atlas defense on Saturday afternoon. So again, I don't blame them for this loss, giving up just those 10 scores in that game. But I think more so you have to look at the offensive end of the field with what this Atlas offense was able to do, or maybe not able to do in that one, as they went about 15 minutes of game action without a goal. They scored 4 in the opening quarter, just 5 the last 3 combined. And you even break down some of the numbers for some of the individual performances that the Atlas offense had in that one. Eric Law, 1 goal on 4 shots, also had 3 turnovers. Jake Caraway, a guy that a few weeks ago talked about volume shooting, definitely did that, but only went 1 for 10 shooting with 2 turnovers. Jeff Teat, another one, 1 for 5 shooting with 8 turnovers on Saturday against that tough Waterdogs defense. So combined, the 3 guys who I would consider some of the leaders of this offense in terms of production, not named Brian Costabile, combined 3 for 19 shooting. That's 16% for the game with 13 combined turnovers. So again, I don't blame the defense. I don't blame JD Colarusso. I think their struggle and the reason why they lost this game comes on the offensive end. Just not a very good offensive outing for these guys, as I just laid out for you. But again, they went up against a very tough, very confident Waterdogs defense. Dylan Ward in the cage was fantastic, had 17 saves, going 65% against what is the #1 scoring offense in the league with this Atlas offense. So again, they absolutely shut these guys down. So again, hats off to Dylan Ward and this Waterdogs defense. But really, like I said, I don't want to see, and I haven't yet, but I'm saying I don't want to see anyone on lacrosse Twitter saying that this is the reason, or this is a chance for the Atlas to bring back Jack Kincannon for the playoff push, because I don't think that JD Colarusso can't be that guy that can lead them through the postseason and have a chance to play for the PLL championship here in 2021. Because like I said, JD Colarusso and this defense did not lose you this game. And I think that as long as he continues doing what he's done in the cage for the Atlas, and the Atlas defense continues their high level of play that they've done in front of him these last several games, as long as the offense can bounce back from that tough game against the Waterdogs, where, like I said, they had 9 goals in that game, but they came into that game averaging 16 over their previous 3 games. I think as long as the offense can bounce back in the postseason, they'll be playing the Cannons for the 3rd time this year in the first round of the playoffs. As long as they can bounce back, I think that they'll be just fine, because they have more than enough there on the defensive side of the field. And even you look at the stripe with Trevor Baptiste, he's playing at such a high level right now that as long as the offense can find a way to bounce back from that game against the Waterdogs, I think that they'll be just fine. But as for the Cannons, as I mentioned, Waterdogs get number 1. Cannons come in at number 7 after winning that game on Saturday night against the Chrome to earn their spot, the final spot in the PLL postseason. I think really the Cannons are kind of just lucky to be here right now, because they won the biggest game of their season to this point in order to get into the postseason. And I'm not really sure that they have what it takes to upset a team like the Atlas in that first round matchup, because I do think they have the offense to do it. But then you look at other aspects of their game, they're last in scoring defense, and the Atlas will be looking to bounce back offensively from that game against the Waterdogs, where, like I said, they hold the number 1 scoring offense in the league, even despite that loss. So again, a tough ask for this Cannons defense. And I think at the stripe, you have to give the advantage to a guy like Trevor Baptiste, who went 76% last weekend against Kevin Riesman, against the Cannons in that 1-goal win for the Atlas. And I think in the cage, I would give a slight edge to Morocco, but I think that as long as Colarusso can stay around that 50% mark, then it should be another tight game, maybe even another 1-goal game we could be in store for. I definitely wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. And I think it's interesting for Paul Rabel in specific with this Cannon squad that he finally makes the playoffs without it being an everyone makes it kind of situation like it was with the 2020 championship series. And he had been a part of the last place Atlas teams the previous 2 years, and he needed to win against the Chrome to avoid being part of the last place Cannons team here in 2021. So I think it'll be interesting to see him now in a playoff position where he has a chance to now pick up a win against his former team and upset his former team. And while it would be his first win in now 3 tries against his former team in the Atlas, it would be the biggest one of the season, the biggest meeting between those two so far. So he would definitely, I guess in a way, kind of get that last laugh against his former team in the Atlas. But coming up after the break, segment 2 on the show, Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, we're going to get to the final regular season power rankings here for the PLL. So we'll take a break and come right back. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. All right, welcome back. Segment 2 on a Monday here, Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, talking the final regular season power rankings in the PLL. Jumping right into it, I got the Waterdogs number 1. I think as unbelievable as it may seem, the Waterdogs actually went from number 8 on this list earlier on in this season all the way up to number 1. And I think it's mainly because the things that hurt them at the start of the year, mainly their goalie play and their defense in particular, ended up actually being the strength of the team by the end of the season, and what we saw on Saturday against the Atlas. And they also hold the number 3 scoring offense in the league as well. So again, like I said, the things that kind of were holding this team back in the first half of the year actually ended up being what got them to this point in the season after all. Number 2, I've got the Atlas because, again, I think at the start of the season, I don't think anyone could have predicted the Atlas being this high this late in the season, but they did go ahead and rattle off 5 straight wins not that long ago. They became the league's number 1 scoring offense, and they really rallied around their backup goalie in JD Colarusso, who is now 3-1 as a starter this season. He's gone 50% or better in 3 of his 4 games that he's started in, including the loss to the Waterdogs, and is giving up just 10.25 scores per game. So I mentioned that in segment 1. averaging about 50% per game, just about 10 scores against per game. And the Atlas, I think, should continue sticking with Colarusso into the playoffs at this point and just hope that the offense can bounce back from a tough outing against the Waterdogs. Number 3, I've got the Archers. The Archers took down the Whipsnakes in kind of Whipsnakes fashion when you think about it this past weekend, and the offense was up to its usual tricks in that game, making highlight play after highlight play. It seemed like I didn't really get to watch that game, but I definitely caught some plays on Twitter. So again, like I said, just making play after play at the offensive end. And I think that while they finished the regular season just a game over 500 after starting 3-0, the Archers will still be a tough team to get out in the postseason. Number 4, I've got the Whipsnakes. The Whipsnakes finished the regular season 5-4 overall after starting 3-0, kind of like the Archers did. But the absence of Matt Rambo really hurt this team in a lot of different ways, not even just at the offensive end, and that's something that I've talked about in past episodes of the podcast. But with him back in the lineup this weekend, the Whips went 1-1, and he really seemed to shoulder a lot of the load in his first game back, accounting for 4 goals and 2 assists in a game where they scored 14 points. So he basically accounted for almost half of their offensive production in that game. Number 5, I have the Redwoods. The Redwoods, kind of like the last 2 teams we've talked about, finished 5-4, and while being sort of middle of the pack in scoring offense, they ranked 2nd in faceoff percentage, 3rd in goaltending, and 1st in power play, and 1st in penalty killing on the other side of it. But I think the tough part for them will be fixing the faceoff position with the likely absence of T.D. Erlin. Charlie Leonard did well in replacing him this weekend, but they, I think, will need another body behind him as a secondary option. So I would expect them to make some sort of move prior to the playoffs starting. Number 6, I have the Chaos. The Chaos started the year 0-3 and had their share of struggles. I mean, particularly at the stripe. That's something that I've talked about at length throughout the regular season. But they managed to finish the year 4-2. Their last 6 games while going 3-2 against playoff teams in that span. And Blaze will likely be the front runner, I would guess, for goalie of the year for the 3rd straight year. And the defense ranks 3rd in scores against average. So, but I think that Chaos still haven't been able to improve much at the stripe, going just 44% on the year, although Adler did go 61% on the weekend against both the Archers and the Redwoods. So maybe seeing some improvement there heading into the postseason, but still as a season as a whole, still not where I think that they would want to be at the stripe at this point in the year. Then number 7, I've got the Cannons. The Cannons were, I guess, the poster child, you could say, for 1-goal losses this year, and they'll now play the team they lost to twice in the regular season by 1 goal each in the Atlas. And the face-off, kind of like the Chaos, the face-off has been a problem for them this year, even after retooling that position mid-season, making a couple moves there. Statistically, the Cannons are a middle-of-the-pack team at best, I would say, but when it comes to the playoffs, I wouldn't really count them out either. And it'll be tough for the Atlas to beat them a 3rd time, I think, admittedly. As an Atlas fan, it'll be tough for them. And if they can upset Atlas, they being Cannons, obviously, if they can upset the Atlas, there's a possibility of playing the Chaos in the semifinals, which I think is yet another winnable game for the Cannons. So all they really have to do is get past Atlas in that first round, and the Cannons might be able to make some noise here in the playoffs after playing for their lives against the Chrome just a few days ago. Then number 8, I've got the Chrome. Chrome definitely had their injuries this season, but then again, so did many of the teams in the PLL this year. But they were never really able to put it together outside of beating the then number 1 Whipsnakes and then number 1 Archers in back-to-back games, which ended up being their only 2 wins on the regular season. And the name of the game, I think, in 2021 was consistency for Chrome, or lack thereof. And they just really, I think, couldn't measure up to a lot of the competition that they faced this season for whatever reason. I mean, they ranked last in scoring offense. They were 7th in scoring defense. And I think for a time it looked like they leaned heavily on a lot of their rookies. So you could maybe consider the Chrome to be a bounce back candidate in 2022 when they have second year guys like Jackson Morrill, Ryan Tarafanko, Kevin Rogers, and Nick Grill, who they acquired in that Justin Gutterding trade. And also, I believe that they'll hold on to the draft rights to JT Giles Harris as well. So that's a pretty solid young group of guys to have going into next season, and again, kind of making them a potential bounce back candidate in 2022. But we're going to take one more break, come back in just a minute for segment 3. We'll get your thoughts in the mix from this final weekend in the regular season in Albany for the PLL. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, welcome back. Final segment of the show here on a Monday, Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. We'll get to your thoughts here in just a second. You can hit me up on Twitter at Stevie Mack Media is my Twitter handle for all PLL and show related content and topics, discussion, everything you want to get into with me on there. Got a couple comments that I want to get to here as we get set to wrap up the show. From Coach Shrek, he says, can the Redwoods still be contenders to win it all if TD is out for the rest of the season? Can the Cannons pull off an upset in the first round of the playoffs against the Atlas? So to get to his first question about the Redwoods being a contender without TD Erlin, yes, I do think they can. It'll depend on what they do at the stripe to replace him, or even just how serious his injury is. I mean, we don't know how serious it is at this point, but we know it was serious enough to keep him out of their second game of the weekend. But assuming it is season ending for TD Erlin, yes, I do think they still have enough there in order to make a run and be a contender at the championship. But I do think that it makes it just a little bit harder without having that consistent force at the stripe in a guy like TD Erlin. He says, can the Cannons pull off an upset in the first round of the playoffs against the Atlas? Yeah, and I mean, I talked about that earlier on in segment 1 and touched on it a little bit, I think, in segment 2 as well. Yes, I do think they actually can pull off the upset. I think it'll be interesting to see how that game plays out. We've already seen these two teams go at it twice in the regular season. Both games ended in a 1-goal win for the Atlas. So yeah, I definitely think that they have the ability to compete with a team like the Atlas and really give them a run for their money. And no, I wouldn't be necessarily all that surprised if the Cannons were able to pull it out. But I do have to give the advantage in this one to the Atlas because, like I said before, they're not very good at the stripe. The Cannons aren't. Even with the moves that they made to try and retool that position mid-season. So I would definitely give Baptiste the heavy edge at the stripe. Goalie, I would give the slight edge to Morocco for the Cannons. Offensively, we all know how good this Cannons offense can be, specifically when you have a guy like Lyle Thompson at that end of the field. We all know how good they can be, but my concern with them lies in the defense in front of Morocco and their ability to win faceoffs to get the ball to guys like Lyle at that end of the field. So I definitely don't think it's outside the question or outside the realm of possibility that the Cannons can win that game, but I really do have to give the edge to the Atlas in that one. From King Street Linden, he says, what's the path to upset? How many things for the Atlas have to go wrong for the Cannons to win? Where do the Cannons have to match up superiority? Yeah, so like I said with Coach Shrek's question about this matchup is you do almost have to feel like things would have to go wrong in a certain way for the Atlas, for the Cannons to be able to actually pull this game out. Do they have the ability one-on-one to make this a competitive game? Yeah, like I said, they lost the 2 previous meetings by 1 goal each, so they have no problem with making this a competitive game. But when you talk about what needs to happen for them to actually go ahead and win this game, I do think that there needs to be some things that sort of bounce their way in that game for that to happen. I think it has to come down to maybe the Atlas shooting themselves in the foot one too many times. Maybe it's a turnover thing. Maybe Baptiste just has a off game at the stripe. Maybe Colarusso isn't seeing shots the way that he's been and just has an off night or something. I don't know. But yeah, I do think to a certain degree, some things may have to go wrong for the Atlas in order for the Cannons to pull that game out. I mean, a couple weeks ago, I went back and watched the first meeting between these 2 teams from Baltimore. I was in Baltimore that weekend for those games, so I got to watch it live, but you do get a different feel for it from the broadcast point of view. You get to see different angles of different plays. So I went back and watched that game a few weeks ago, and there were times in that game where I thought, man, that really bounced the Cannons' way. And I said that probably 3, 4, 5 times by the end of the game. And you look at the final score was a 1-goal game. If those certain plays don't bounce the Cannons' ways, instead of being a 1-goal game, you're talking a 4 or 5 goal game. And I know that sometimes things like that happen. It doesn't always bounce a certain way towards one team or the other. So I get that. It's kind of a 50-50 thing, but yeah, I do think that to some extent there are some things that have to go the way of the Cannons in order for them to win that game. From Michael Ramirez, he says, think my Atlas are on upset alert. So again, there kind of seems to be a theme here with a lot of these comments, but he says, think my Atlas are on upset alert. 2 very close games that go in the Bulls' favor. Could the 3rd time be the charm for the Cannons? Yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse here or anything or sound like a broken record, but again, I think that this is one of those games in the first round where you could easily see this be the upset. I wouldn't also think it was crazy to suggest the Chaos could beat the Archers, in the first round either. And Whipsnake's Redwoods is going to be another instant classic, I'm sure. But yeah, this is definitely a game that, despite there being the gap in the rankings between these 2 teams, Atlas and Cannons, I definitely think this is going to be another really fun, electric game that probably will come down to the final minute or 2 of play. Another 1 or 2 goal a game in that situation. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that game for sure. From Brian, he says, great weekend of lacrosse. Miles Jones has firmly put himself in the discussion for MVP, and Atlas are on upset alert. Again, kind of a running theme here, it looks like. He says, the team with the best player in the world, Lyle, always has a puncher's chance. Also, we aren't talking enough about the Waterdogs D. Burns and Randall are studs. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to really revisit the whole Atlas thing for the 4th or 5th time on this episode. I feel like I've pretty much said all I need to say about that. But yeah, Miles Jones has quietly, I think, played really well here the past few weeks of the regular season. So I definitely think that he has put himself in line for some sort of postseason recognition here this year. And yeah, like I said, real quick, just the thing about Lyle is that, yeah, anytime you have a guy like that on your team, you're going to have a chance. But again, I think it comes down to, can their defense get stops, get the ball to their offense? Same thing at the stripe. Can Kevin Reisman win faceoffs against Trevor Baptiste one-on-one and get the ball to their offense? Otherwise, you effectively take out the best part of the Cannons team, which is their offensive unit. Right? Like, they can't score goals if they never have the ball. And that's the final thing I'm going to say on that. He says, also, we aren't talking enough about the Waterdogs D. Yeah, like I said at the top of the show, that's been the thing that has essentially turned their entire season completely around. I've talked a lot about, in the first half of the year, Dylan Ward and his struggles in the cage and just the defense in general of backing him up in front of him in the cage. And yeah, now all of a sudden, these last couple games, we're talking about this being possibly the strength of this team is their defensive unit and what they've been able to do, and the play of Dylan Ward in the cage, having 17 saves in the biggest game of their season the other day against the Atlas. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we're necessarily talking about them as much as we should, and I'd throw another team out there. I think the Atlas aren't getting as much attention around the lacrosse community and lacrosse Twitter as maybe they should, especially considering they've had a backup goalie starting for them the past 3-4 games, whatever it is, that maybe we're not talking about them as much, because I think we tend to focus on the Whipsnakes defense or the Redwoods defense or the Archers defense or what have you. But I definitely think Brian has a point. We're not talking enough about the Waterdogs defense and just how dominant they've been over these last several games. But like I said, I would also throw the Atlas into that mix as well. So that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. You can check out the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple, Google, Spotify, Anchor, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, also in the mix as well. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post, and let me know what you guys think about the regular season wrapping up in the PLL and what you're looking forward to here as the playoffs get underway in just a few days. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.